The first thing my brother did after I woke up from surgery was ask for my passwords. Not, "How are you feeling?" Not, "The doctors said you're gonna be okay." Just passwords. I remember lying there half-drugged in a hospital bed staring at Gavin while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and machines kept making those soft little heartbeat sounds people only notice when they're scared. At first I honestly thought maybe the pain medication was making me paranoid. Then he said it again. "We need access to the accounts, Miles. Clients are already calling." Need. Interesting word choice. Because 18 months later, when federal investigators walked through his office carrying evidence boxes, Gavin suddenly stopped talking about what we needed. Funny how that works. My name's Miles Corbett. I'm 49 years old, and for almost 15 years I built a regional logistics company from the ground up with 2 pickup trucks, unpaid invoices, and enough caffeine to medically concern most professionals. Corbett Freight Solutions. Started in a rented warehouse outside Columbus with leaking ceilings and one forklift that only worked if you kicked the side panel twice before turning the key. Real glamorous stuff. But it grew. Slowly at first. Then all at once. By the time I turned 47, we managed transportation contracts across 3 states. Nothing giant, but stable. Good reputation. Reliable clients. That mattered to me more than flashy growth. Gavin joined the company 6 years after I started it. My younger brother always had charm. That guy could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 3 new friends and somebody offering him football tickets. Meanwhile I handled operations. Systems. Scheduling. Contracts. Gavin handled relationships. At least that's how we explained it publicly. Truth was, I built structure while he built appearances. Big difference. But family businesses survive on optimism longer than they survive on honesty. The health scare happened fast. One Tuesday afternoon I collapsed walking across our warehouse floor after feeling this crushing pressure in my chest that honestly felt like somebody parked a truck on me. Next thing I remember clearly is waking up after emergency surgery with tubes in my arms and Gavin standing beside the bed holding my phone. "We need temporary control of company access," he said quietly. I was exhausted. Confused. Scared. So I nodded like, "Sure, whatever." Big mistake. For the next 3 months recovery basically erased my life. Doctors. Cardiac rehab. Medication schedules. Meanwhile Gavin slowly took over everything at the company. At first it seemed helpful. He kept telling me, "Focus on getting healthy." And honestly, part of me felt grateful. Then little things started feeling off. Clients stopped calling me directly. Financial reports became harder to access. Even long-time employees sounded strangely careful during conversations. One afternoon I drove to the warehouse unexpectedly after rehab therapy. The atmosphere changed the second I walked in. You can feel tension physically sometimes. Like humidity before storms. Conversations stopped too quickly. Warehouse supervisors suddenly found reasons to look busy elsewhere. Then I noticed something else. My office had been remodeled. Not cleaned. Remodeled. Different furniture. New glass desk. My family photos gone. I stood there staring while Gavin walked out of the conference room smiling too casually. "Hey," he said. "You should have called first." That sentence stayed with me afterward. Should have called first. Like I was visiting somebody else's business. I looked around slowly. What happened to my office? Gavin shrugged. Clients wanted a more modern executive space. Clients. Another convenient imaginary group people hide behind when they don't want to admit personal decisions. I just nodded slowly. Right. Then came the real moment. A woman I didn't recognize walked past carrying folders and asked Gavin, "Do you still want the ownership transfer forms prepared before Friday?" Silence. Tiny silence. But enough. Gavin answered too quickly. "We'll discuss later." Ownership transfer. Yeah. That didn't sit right. That night I sat in my kitchen staring at company records until almost 2 in the morning while my daughter Avery pretended not to worry about me from the living room couch. She finally asked quietly, "Dad, do you trust Uncle Gavin?" Kids notice emotional shifts faster than adults sometimes. I didn't answer immediately. Because honestly, I wasn't sure anymore. Over the next few weeks, things escalated carefully. Which almost made it worse. Gavin never openly pushed me out. He just slowly erased me professionally. Long-time clients suddenly dealt only with him. Board meetings happened without notifying me. Vendor relationships shifted. Even payroll authority changed quietly through temporary medical authorizations I barely remembered signing after surgery. That's the thing about vulnerable moments. Bad people rarely attack directly. They wait until confusion does half the work for them. Then came the shareholder meeting. Funny word considering I still technically owned majority control. Gavin stood near the conference room window wearing one of those expensive charcoal suits he started buying after taking over operations. Guy suddenly dressed like a podcast about private equity. He folded his hands calmly. The company needs stability. I sat there listening while 3 board members avoided eye contact. Gavin continued. The clients trust continuity. Translation, they trust whoever currently controls access. Then he finally said it. I think stepping back permanently might be best for your health. There it was. The soft corporate execution. I remember staring at him thinking, this man really rehearsed this conversation in the mirror. But I stayed calm. That threw him off slightly. You already transferred temporary authority, he added carefully. Temporary, I repeated. Circumstances evolve. No. Greed evolves. Circumstances just expose it. Still, I didn't explode. People like Gavin expect emotional reactions because emotional people look unstable in professional environments. Instead I just nodded slowly. Understood. Then I went home and started reading everything. Every contract. Every authorization. Every financial adjustment made during my recovery. That's when patterns started appearing. Unauthorized consulting payments. Vendor favoritism toward companies connected to Gavin's friends. Inflated operational expenses. Nothing dramatic individually. But together? Messy. Very messy. I called an old friend named Lydia Mercer. Corporate compliance attorney. Smartest person I know besides maybe Avery, honestly. Lydia reviewed documents quietly for 2 weeks before finally calling me. Miles, she said carefully, your brother's either incredibly reckless, or he thinks nobody's paying attention. Turns out Gavin used temporary executive authority to reroute multiple internal vendor agreements towards shell consulting companies connected indirectly back to him. Not fully invisible. Just hidden beneath enough paperwork most exhausted people would never notice. Problem was, I wasn't exhausted anymore. Recovery changes people strangely. You stop wasting emotional energy once you realize how fragile everything actually is. Lydia advised patience. No dramatic confrontation yet. Documentation first. Always documentation. Meanwhile Gavin kept expanding aggressively. New office leases. Expensive branding campaigns. Luxury executive retreats that somehow looked suspiciously like vacations. Employees noticed too. Morale dropped fast. Good workers quietly started leaving. One warehouse manager named Hector finally told me over coffee, Guy thinks he owns the room now. That line almost made me laugh. Because arrogance always gets louder right before consequences arrive. Then came the trigger. 18 months after my surgery, Gavin landed what he called a transformational partnership deal during a massive client presentation downtown. Big ballroom. Investors. Press coverage. Very theatrical. Only problem? The financial disclosures attached to the expansion proposal included operational figures Lydia already flagged as manipulated. Meaning Gavin accidentally handed investigators a roadmap. See, one vendor dispute already triggered preliminary financial review requests months earlier. Gavin didn't know that. Arrogant people rarely notice quiet scrutiny because they're addicted to public attention. The actual collapse happened on a Thursday morning. I remember because Avery called me while I was buying mulch for the backyard. "Dad," she said slowly, "I think something's happening at the office." By the time I arrived, federal investigators were already walking through headquarters carrying evidence boxes while employees stood outside pretending not to stare. Gavin stood near the entrance arguing with somebody in a navy blazer. His confidence was completely gone. Amazing how quickly expensive suits stop looking powerful once panic enters the body. He spotted me across the parking lot. For a second neither of us moved. Then he walked toward me fast. "Miles," he said quietly, "I need to explain." "No," I interrupted calmly. "You really don't." That silence afterward felt enormous. Not because I hated him. Honestly, that would have been easier. What I felt was disappointment so deep it almost became exhaustion. This was my little brother. The kid who used to sleep in my room during thunderstorms because loud weather scared him. And somehow we ended up here. Gavin lowered his voice. "I was trying to protect the company." "No," I said quietly. "You were trying to own it." That landed hard. Because deep down, he knew it was true. The investigations dragged on for months afterward. Financial penalties. Contract losses. Civil litigation tied to vendor fraud and disclosure violations. Nothing dramatic like television. Just slow professional consequences arriving exactly on schedule. The board removed Gavin almost immediately. Most investors backed away quietly once the audits became public. As for me, I returned carefully. Not like some revenge fantasy either. Honestly, rebuilding trust mattered more than reclaiming control. That took time. A lot of uncomfortable meetings. A lot of apologizing to employees who deserved better leadership than what the company became during my absence. Hector stayed. A few others returned too. Turns out good people mostly want stability and honesty. Fancy presentations impress investors more than workers. Last winter I visited Gavin once at a small apartment outside Dayton. Nothing luxurious anymore. He looked older. Smaller somehow. We sat drinking terrible coffee in awkward silence for almost 20 minutes before he finally asked, "Do you think Dad would hate me?" That question hit harder than I expected. I stared out the apartment window for a while before answering. "No," I said honestly. "But I think he'd be disappointed you confused success with ownership." Gavin nodded slowly after that. No arguments. No excuses. Just quiet understanding finally arriving too late to stop the damage. These days Corbett Freight runs smaller than before. Safer too. More careful. Honestly, I prefer it that way. Sometimes survival rearranges your priorities permanently. And every once in a while, usually early mornings before the warehouse gets loud, I'll walk past my old office and remember standing there after surgery realizing my own brother had already started replacing me before I was fully conscious again. Funny thing is, losing the company for a while taught me exactly which parts were actually worth saving.